Welcome back to Treasury Talks. We have Gui Gomes, founder and CEO of OranjeBTC, fresh out of Brazil. We're back after Thanksgiving holidays. We are excited to have a fun guest. We've been lining this up for a while. We have Brian Rothenberg, my co-host, Avi Mash, and Sean Ristow aren't here today. But Gui, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome.
So I'll kick things off. Some who are watching here today may know you from your time at Swan, but we know that you also have a background at Bridgewater. So we were hoping that you might give us sort of a snapshot of sort of how we got to becoming a founder of a Bitcoin treasury company. So how your experiences probably growing up in Brazil, and then sort of with your education, and then at Bridgewater, and then at Swan, got you to where you are today. Maybe the abridged version, but I think that'll kind of set up some of the things that we're going to talk about nicely.
Great. I'll be brief, but so I'm Brazilian, born and raised, spent most of my life in Brazil. I started my first company out of college, ran that business for about 7 years. Then I really wanted to get closer to finance and technology, have an experience abroad. Moved from Brazil to the US to go take my MBA, went to UCLA Anderson. And that's when I met Bitcoin for the first time. That's when I started studying. But instead of going back home and bring a new business and new technology, what actually happened was that I joined Bridgewater Associates. So I left business school and joined Bridgewater, first working with Ray. He was transitioning, and there was kind of an internal strategy team helping him on that process. I joined the group, spent about a year on that role, and then later on moved to a business development initiative, was kind of a growth unit, and spent about 3 years helping Bridgewater to distribute their investment strategies around the globe. But in the meantime, I was studying Bitcoin. I was researching more and more. That's when I orange built myself in a very meaningful way. It was a mix of working at the largest hedge fund around the world that has best-in-class research about how the world works, and also studying Bitcoin nonstop. And right at that point that I decided it was time to join the industry full-time, left Bridgewater in 2022, joined Swan Bitcoin in 2022, early May. And then that was my full-time position into Bitcoin. Worked at a company for about 2.5 years. And then last summer, left to build OranjeBTC.
From that, for those that aren't familiar, Ray Dalio is the Bridgewater founder, correct? And we've just heard like crazy stories of just people working at Bridgewater. They're like scoring on different responses on other employees inside the company, and then people going into the bathroom and crying between meetings because it's an intense environment. I mean, that has to be a little more intense, I'd say, than working at a Bitcoin company where it seems like everyone's has this like mindset of like, hey, we're all in this together. Let's go out and make Bitcoin, the underlying world reserve asset. I guess, did you find when you went to Swan, everyone outside of Swan was now suddenly the battles you were facing instead of internally, maybe at Bridgewater?
So interesting, because what I like to say, 1 year in Bitcoin is just like 7 years, right? It's so different than any other company. It's 24/7. The pace of development of news, of what's going on, of change is so fast that you have to adapt. So in one way, yes, and Bridgewater and Ray Dalio has been very open about the culture and the idea of meritocracy and using technology and different tools to give real-time feedback, right? So as you mentioned, you go to meetings and you have a platform by which you can rate and give real-time feedback on every single person, right? So for some people, it's very tough because usually you're not used to have real-time feedback. I found it fascinating and really liked the environment of like, okay, just tell me to my face what's going on. And so it's not for everyone, that's for sure, but it is a mindset of not holding back, of sharing as you see it, of debate, meritocracy, which I like. And to some extent, there's a lot about Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is fully transparent. There's no games. The protocol is running for 16 years, and you know how it is. But I gotta say, from one side, it is amazing to work for a Bitcoin company, as everyone see the key issues of the financial system as they are, and you're trying to bring a new technology, a new form of money to drive adoption. But overall, I think it's way more challenging to work for Bitcoin than any other industry, because just the pace of innovation is 24/7. There's no weekends, and when the markets are closed, the markets are closed. Bitcoin is beautiful because it's never closed, right? So you're always on, which I like it, but again, it's not for everyone.
I guess on that point, and kind of maybe wrapping up a little bit about sort of your time at Bridgewater, there is, I guess, more adoption by the day, it seems like, of Bitcoin within traditional finance in various ways. Lots of news this week that we can talk about later. But there's still a lot of people who are hesitant or not adopting this. They're not seeing what, the three of us and probably everybody who's watching this video sees. And I'm curious for your perspective on what do you think they might be missing in terms of the macro lens or the debasement trade before we had that name on it, amongst traditional finance this year? Is it just, the system that they've always been operating under? You talked about that radical transparency, and maybe they're just not seeing it or not open to it. I'm just curious, I'm not trying to call anybody specifically out, but what your thoughts are on that.
I think one of the main challenges with Bitcoin and understanding it is that it touches in so many different fields, right? There's a little bit of macro, there's a little bit of finance, there's a little bit of technology, of game theory, of monetary history. So there's so many different components. And to some extent, for you to really, really build conviction to the point of moving all of your assets into Bitcoin, or joining the industry full time, or increasing your portfolio allocation into Bitcoin, you need to go through that journey, right? And not many people are willing to go to that journey, right? Or they're trying to find reasons not to build conviction, right? Or it's too new, or it has been used in the past for money laundering and illegal activities, or the government will shut it down. Why would a government allow like a decentralized currency to succeed? So there are so many reasons to say no. And to say yes, you have to go to so many phases of understanding and open-mindedness and reflection that, in my perspective, that's why it takes, everyone will eventually get it, right? But at this point in time, for those who have been following this industry for almost a decade, it looks like, my God, how people don't get it yet. But I have to be very honest, it's very new, right? The Bitcoin ETF is an example that was kind of game changer. It's not even 2 years old, right? Just this week, Vanguard said, okay, I think we're going to allow people to buy Bitcoin ETFs out of our platform. So it just shows how early it is. And I think that's one of the key reasons, in my perspective, why it takes time for people to understand it. And maybe here I can even do a little bit of a comparison with Brazil, which is the market in which we're listed. I think it needs time, and it needs a lot of resources. The US right now is blessed by the amount of companies and people and folks like you guys who are providing high quality content and covering the industry and helping others to understand what is Bitcoin. But it took a while for the US as well, right? The first public company in the US to have some kind of Bitcoin exposure strategy in 2020, then Coinbase listed, and so it goes. So when you go see a market like Brazil, we have fewer resources, fewer companies talking about this nonstop, fewer asset managers building research. And you can see that adoption there is behind the US because not a single voice, right? What makes the level of adoption in the United States right now is a combination of the miners plus Saylor plus Fidelity and now BlackRock and all the community online that has been driving adoption for many, many, many years. So that all sums up to a vibrant ecosystem. And Brazil has a very vibrant ecosystem as well, and a lot of reasons to adopt Bitcoin, but we don't have that many large voices in the market yet. So going back to resources in time, I think that's a combination, and people just need time to understand, study, and get comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, bringing up Brazil, what is the environment, that I think that Bitcoin is coming into? I think too many people lump every market together, in Latin America, but really there's nuance to, how much inflation you have, what kind of perspective the government has on, and what kind of legislation they have where they can print money, and like what history they've had. It's certainly like Venezuela is an extreme example that has been in the news recently. But for those that are not familiar with Brazil as much from a fiscal perspective or, from a Bitcoin adoption perspective, could you talk a little bit about, or give us a little bit backstory there?
Yeah, let me set up the context for us. So if you think Bitcoin is good for America, for the United States, Bitcoin is great for Latin America, right? And why is that? This is a region that has had hyperinflation in the past, currency debasement, capital controls, reset of currencies, right? I recall my parents, when I was a young boy in Brazil, they'll get their paychecks. First thing you do, you go straight to the supermarket and spend every single dime in goods, because a week later, you buy 20% fewer goods, right? So that's what hyperinflation means. And we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s here. So it's been a while, but that history is still there, right? And even though things are much, much, much more stable, inflation is still anywhere between 3 and 7%, right? So the US is here now setting around 3, the target was 2. So that's kind of moderate level of inflation. Down there is higher levels of inflation. And why is that? Well, Brazil and other countries in Latin America, they don't have the privilege of being the world's reserve currency, right? So it's a derivative of the dollar. The dollar is bad because the Fed can print it, and we know the consequence. So when you are a central bank in a weaker currency, you're facing all the issues of external trade and what's happening with the dollar. And it's funny because Bitcoiners, they track the price of Bitcoin kind of a hourly, daily, weekly basis. And that's how one grows up in Brazil, right? You track the price of the dollar against your currency on a hourly, daily, weekly basis, because a lot of the economy depends on the dollar, and your iPhone depends on the dollar, your vacations to anywhere outside of Brazil depends on the dollar, the trade, all of that stuff. So people are very common to live in a currency that doesn't run the world, and tracking that on a daily basis. So that's a little bit of the history. Sorry, I saw you're coming up with a question on that or not?
Well, I think there's a lot of questions that probably come out of that, but that's good. But I guess maybe trying to set the stage for the company you founded. Why is Brazil an interesting market, I guess, to those of us who are interested in Bitcoin treasury companies. What's the play there? What are the special circumstances around all of those factors that you might be able to take advantage of from a strategic perspective within the company there, and sort of your size and, working in this in Brazil, being amongst the first, like how does that position you best for success?
Yeah, so let me touch on all of that. So that's a little bit of the stage, right? It is like we have to mention other aspects. Massive economy, right? Top 9 around the globe, 215 million people live in Brazil, almost 1 billion people around Latin America, from Mexico to Argentina, Brazil, and vibrant economy, but very cyclical. We had our ups and downs, right? So, but very open to the concept of different currencies, right? And the need of a hard currency. So in a few aspects, Brazil is behind the US. I mentioned before, we don't have as many players producing as many high quality content about Bitcoin and helping to drive adoption. But on the other hand, when you see people transacting Bitcoin and other stable coins, we almost have 25 million users. Banks in Brazil sell you Bitcoin out of your brokerage account. So, like, I think we're still a few years away from, you see, Bank of America or Wells Fargo offering you Bitcoin out of your checking account. That reality is already in Brazil. And I'm not talking about small banks. I'm talking about the largest banks in that region. They sell you Bitcoin out of your brokerage account, of your checking account. So there is acceptance, there is penetration, but very few people, especially on the more sophisticated institutional world, have high allocation to Bitcoin. And that's what we are coming to the market to help to solve, right? We have a very important education mission to provide high quality content to retail investors, but also institutional investors. And by being the first listed company in Latin America fully dedicated to Bitcoin, now we're giving opportunity to a lot of players to have exposure into this industry and Bitcoin that otherwise was not possible. So local pension funds, local insurance companies, most asset managers, they cannot allocate to Bitcoin or Bitcoin ETFs due to regulatory constraints or mandate restrictions. And by having a company fully dedicated to this market with an important Bitcoin treasury, now we're allowing for a lot of players to build exposure in the local market. Another important reason, we do have Bitcoin ETFs in Brazil, but they're much more expensive, right? You guys know the mission of a treasury company is to increase your Bitcoin allocation over time. Bitcoin ETFs in Brazil charge you anywhere from 70 bips to 150 bips per year. So your exposure is going down year over year. We bring an opportunity for exposure to go up. And these are one of the key strategic reasons we're going into that market. Massive market with key reasons to adopt Bitcoin, but Bitcoin adoption is a few years behind the US. And we're coming with the mission to drive adoption and bring a new way for local and international investors to have exposure to that economy and the Bitcoin industry.
So you mentioned on the side of like ETF fees, and so that is something where people don't always think of if they are slowly diluting, the value or the returns that you have. Is the legislation there? It sounds like most asset managers cannot allocate to the ETF anyways. So in the process of doing a roadshow, getting out there, like getting OrangeBTC in front of them, like what's the process for having those conversations? And do you have any fears that they might single out treasury companies and say, hey, we don't want Bitcoin treasury companies or ETFs or, spot Bitcoin allocation?
I think everyone needs a Bitcoin strategy, right? Everyone needs a Bitcoin allocation. We know what 1% of Bitcoin exposure does to any portfolio out there. So I think the allocation is key. And Brazil has a very strong financial history, right? Going back a little bit to what I mentioned, just because of inflation, the settlement, the processes, the local industry really, really became sophisticated to be able to manage the local volatility and trade against the war. So, as an example, local banks are much more efficient than US banks at this point in time. And it's a little bit about inflation, right? You could not take 2-3 days to settle a wire because by the time you did so, the face value of the wire was 5-10% lower. So from a financial engineer perspective, local asset managers, they can grasp the concept quite easily, right? You explain the different ways for you to increase your Bitcoin allocation over time, that companies can take leverage at lower cost than most individuals, that you can grow your Bitcoin per share over time. I think the challenge in Brazil is not much about the concept or for having many opportunities like the US, is one step behind. It's explaining why one should have a Bitcoin allocation, why Bitcoin makes sense to a portfolio, how you should be thinking about a new form of money, why there is a possibility that the US dollar is not the one ruling the world 30, 40 years from now, and Bitcoin could be a reserve world currency. I think that's the gap. When you are talking to local asset managers and institutions in Brazil, our main mission is what Saylor has done back in 2020, right? He was first explaining Bitcoin and why Bitcoin made sense years before becoming a Bitcoin treasury company. And it's a little bit of the process we're going locally, explaining the Bitcoin concept, but also explaining how the model works.
It's kind of interesting. And I know that for your company, you have a dual mandate, I guess you say, with education within the local markets being a big piece of that. And it would seem to me that there's kind of, the West, if you will, the US we'll just take as example, where we've got money that's, the best of the leaky buckets, right? It's got the fewest holes or the smallest holes from a fiat standpoint. And then you have other places like if we go to, parts of Africa that are unbanked and things like that, and they have a real different need for Bitcoin there. But the infrastructure, the fact that you're talking about the ability to buy Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies or stable coins, in your brokerage and your banks, are all there. So I'm curious, sort of from your perspective, why the adoption's been so slow, because it seems like it would be a somewhat more advanced economy that would see the need for this even more so than the US in some ways. Is it just the lack of leadership and vision from individuals like yourself, or are there other factors that are coming into that drives into your education mission?
I think the core aspect, in my view, is not as many resources, right? I think for you to build conviction, you need to hear the same story from different angles, right? And you have to hear it from big names, right? To some extent, they don't matter. But when Larry Fink, who has been like one of the titans of Wall Street, goes live to say on the record, I was wrong, and Bitcoin is real, that matters to a lot of people, right? There's Kahir risk that goes away. There is a lot of people that have built their frameworks about finance and money, looking into BlackRock and those big names. That matters, right? When the CEO of a public company that has been running for decades builds a $250 million position into Bitcoin, and goes live every single day, helping to spread adoption, that matters. And none of that have happened in Brazil, right? In Brazil, we're still in that phase of like retail Bitcoiners, cypherpunks on social media, and a few specific companies that haven't grown that much trying to drive adoption, right? And then we have the exchanges, but the exchanges that we know, they're not fully focused on Bitcoin, right? The local exchanges, they have a little bit of everything. So then it's very hard for you to have a clear message about the difference between all these tokens. So that's what I'm saying. I think we're still 5 years behind. I think like people like it because it has had outstanding returns and everyone's looking for returns. People understand having a different currency, but very few people in Brazil at this point in time, from my perspective, have a strong belief that Bitcoin could actually become a new form of money to build a meaningful exposure. So I think that's where we are, and I think that's what we're hoping to help to solve.
Thanks. That's I think it gives good perspective there. And one of the things that I was also kind of thinking about is kind of what we've seen in gold this year. And I'm curious because, again, I don't have a framework for thinking about sort of how Brazilians are thinking about investments and things like that. But because it's been such a banner year for gold, probably the best year that gold has seen in, living memory. Is that something that, especially amongst, being part of the BRICS and everything like that, and seeing China's lead in some of their gold reserves elsewhere, that a lot of Brazilians are focused on? Or is that really not something that you're seeing as much locally that you're competing with?
Most Brazilians are in fixed income, right? And that's the majority of their exposure. Like when the government pays you 15% per year in the local currency, right, it looks quite appealing, right? You don't need to do anything, and the government's paying you every single year anywhere between 12 to 15%. And if you don't have a clear understanding that they're paying you in the local currency, and the local currency has devalued almost 25% against the dollar in the past 2 years. So like just an example, when I moved to the US back in 2016, I was able to buy $1 with about 3.2 BRL, the local Brazilian currency. Today, the same $1 takes 5.4 BRL. And last year got all the way to 6.3. So there has been a meaningful devaluation of the local currency. So for all my fellow friends in Brazil that have not diversified their exposure into the dollar or hopefully into Bitcoin, they lost a lot of global purchasing power, right? So, but again, if you haven't done the work and you're just looking at the local currency, 15% looks quite appealing. So a lot of Brazilians are still lending money to the government to receive 15% into the local currency, but seeing their global purchasing power deteriorate year over year.
Yeah, 12 to 15%. You have to wonder, like, where is that coming from? And it's coming from, there has to be a lot of printing going on.
Yep.
When you're looking at like expansion, like where you spend your time, is it in spending like OranjeBTC, how do you differentiate yourself from other, say, treasury companies in Brazil? I know is it Melius? Brian is also in Brazil. We know Mason Ford over there, but haven't spoke to him specifically on it since he's joined. So how would you say OranjeBTC is a little bit different?
I think the main differentiation from us is we are purpose built. Like we were built on the Bitcoin standard. Mm-hmm. So the company was born to have a meaningful treasury component to drive Bitcoin adoption, but first and foremost, to lead Bitcoin penetration in that corner of the world, right? We've seen what has happened in the US. The same will happen in Brazil. And I think all believe here that we're still very, very early. That there's a lot of new products and new solutions. Just think about what strategy will be doing when they get to 1 million Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is at $1 million, and they have one of the largest brands around the globe. Like that become one of the most interesting companies in terms of possibilities. And that's how we see the same in a new region. So our mandate is very clear. We are starting with education because that's a key component. We are building a community that like Bitcoin and see the work that we do. We are increasing our Bitcoin exposure every single week. And over the long term, we evolve to become a local Bitcoin hub with many financial innovations for the local market. So I think that's the core of the strategy. The company was built for that. And no other company is doing something similar locally.
I guess that kind of leads to two questions. The first one is you're saying that you're stacking Bitcoin every week, which we've seen a slowdown from a lot of other companies. So how is it that you're thinking about that or accessing capital to keep up that consistency within the company? The other thing is kind of the long-term goal to, become a Bitcoin financial platform within the region and to be the leading one within the region. Two very sort of different ideas to kind of talk about, but we'd love to dig in a little bit more to both of those things that you've mentioned there.
So we have been listed for about 7.5 weeks. It's funny, we listed the day before the all-time high. Think about getting the timing right. But it was overall positive. So we listed and we had cash at hand, but we also had shares in Treasury, right? The concept of ATM in Brazil does not exist. So what Saylor and other US companies can do in terms of issuing an ATM program and then selling new shares and capitalizing the company, that model in the local capital market is not available yet. But we have shares in Treasury. And those shares we can sell into the open market. So since launching, we have bought Bitcoin and funded that by using the cash at hand that we had raised before going live, but also by selling shares into the market, capitalizing the company, and buying Bitcoin. And then we're very flexible in our mandate. For a few days, given the market conditions, our mNAV was below 1, and then we did the opposite. Then we bought some shares with cash at hand to generate a Bitcoin yield. So since launching, we have delivered an increase in Bitcoin per share for our shareholders every single week.
I guess just one, I asked two questions, but I'm going to jump in there with one that's important within the industry, which is you're being opportunistic when your mNAV is below 1 by, basically buying back shares. Would you also potentially sell Bitcoin to add Bitcoin per share in similar circumstances in the future? Not saying you definitely would, but is that a possibility? Because some companies don't.
Yeah, we haven't done it. Is not in our short-term plan, but we're overall flexible. Like if we're trading below mNAV and talking about a meaningful discount, that would make very little sense in our case, but who knows, it can happen. Like there's so many ways for you to capitalize yourself. As you know, you can issue more debt, capitalize the company, and buy Bitcoin and buy shares. But at the same time, we see Bitcoin as a currency, right? And currency is meant for trading. So to exchange into other goods, we all believe that Bitcoin is the future currency of the world, and selling Bitcoin in most occasions is not the right move. What you want to actually is hold this for the long term, but in an occasion that you are at a steep discount and you've tried different maneuvers and nothing's working, I think we'd be open to selling Bitcoin to buy back shares. But again, that's kind of the last resource type of strategy. We have 3 or 4 different ways to arbitrage, let's say, the multiple if that happens.
My question is around, all right, so you mentioned ATMs are not a thing in Brazil. What are or I guess I'll preface this by saying, you see the preferred stocks that are being rolled out with, Strive, who we spoke with, Matt Cole and Seda, obviously Sailors, cooked up 5 to 6, and you have Stretch is the most recent one they're putting out. What are things that you're looking at with the idea that it might take a little bit longer to go through Brazilian regulation, and that you might be the one that has to really bang the drum and push, the regulators to come out with these new funding vehicles?
Yeah, so we see with good eyes all the different strategies to accumulate Bitcoin, right? I think Sailor was genius on the convert, right? He's monetizing the volatility and has done extremely well with that. We have done one convertible note as well. It's the first in the history of Latin America, 5 years, no coupon to buy Bitcoin. So we have one of those already in place. We are open to other debt structures that could make sense to accumulate more Bitcoin, including the preferreds, right? I'm pretty positive that at some point in the future, we might do something similar, right? I think Brazilians would appreciate some kind of monthly or quarterly or annual coupon in dollars, right? And as a new type of strategy into their portfolios. We'll have to go through a lot of regulatory process. Of course, as a new company that is just getting off the ground, we don't have a lot of revenue coming in or income. It's very similar to Sailor, that he was getting the pressure, hey, how are you going to pay the dividends? And he said, hey, I just built a USD reserve. So all of these components come to place. I think we have been very innovative to date, and we're going to continue to be very innovative moving forward in terms of driving Bitcoin adoption and creating new products and new ways for local investors or international investors to get exposure to Bitcoin in the region. So we see all this innovation with very good eyes, but also understanding that is very, very new to the US, and Brazil is overall behind. So it might take a little bit longer, but there's so many things to do ahead of us. So we're very excited about all the opportunities.
So I guess jumping off on that, what is most exciting to you about the next 30, 60, 90, 120, 180 days that you're cooking up? So the things that you're working on that you're able to share, or the things that you're excited about specifically for OrangeBTC?
Yeah, so a few things. Let's just what has happened over the past 7 weeks, just to give everyone a flavor of what we've done as a public company. I need to be very thoughtful about what's coming next. But I think giving some context will allow folks to understand what is likely to come. So we listed in early October. We have been buying Bitcoin every single day and increasing every single week and increasing Bitcoin per share since listing. We have done proof of reserves. So our proof of reserves went live, I think, a week or so ago. And now everyone can see our treasury on chain. That was pretty cool. We have launched our Bitcoin dashboard with all the treasury metrics. So that's fully live and anyone can track real time what's going on. We've hosted the first institutional event fully focused on Bitcoin in the first week of November. So that has never happened before. Institutional event about Bitcoin, and we brought together almost 350 people from the local banks, asset managers, regulators, insurance companies, and pension funds to talk about Bitcoin, to talk about our strategy, to talk about what's coming next. We also sponsor the local Bitcoin conference. So there is a local retail Bitcoin conference for about 2,000 people, and we're part of that. We have published 2 reports, one about treasury companies and the second one about Bitcoin. Both of them were written by Sam Callahan, our director of Bitcoin strategy. You guys should host him one day here. He's very knowledgeable about Bitcoin in the region. He's working on a very interesting piece that should come out soon. So that's how I have been rolling over the past 7 weeks. And we had no social media presence. We had no follower base. We had a very small investor base. And I cannot give all the details yet, but we're seeing a lot of local demand. The number of shareholders is growing exponentially, and our social media channels are growing and being established. So I think we're putting the foundation in place. What any people should expect from us. Our main mission, the core mission, our key metric is Bitcoin per share, right? We have been able to improve that metric every single week since listing, and we're going to be fully focused moving forward in increasing that. We have a very small debt ratio, is about 6 to 7%. So we issued that convertible note, as I mentioned, but otherwise it's pure equity. So we have room to issue new forms of debt to accumulate Bitcoin, and I would expect the company to do so into the future. We're going to continue to drive Bitcoin education, bringing more and more content and resources to the region. And by doing the 2 of them, by building the largest balance sheet in the region, and by building the largest brand in the continent about Bitcoin, that gives us a foundation to bring to market a lot of innovations for the space. So that's my key focus and what I'm excited about over the next few months and quarters.
Yeah, I feel like you're having to act the part of both the small treasury company moving fast and innovating new financial products while also being the strategy and hosting a strategy world at the same time and driving adoption. What are your overall feelings on the market? We're always, talking about, all the factors. You mentioned Vanguard at the beginning, which I think has been, a nice bump this week in sentiment. We also had before that, last week was more around Bank of Japan or the Japanese government, raising interest rates was, scaring people and caused a big dip. What's been your feeling to navigate that since you are at the whims of the Bitcoin price overall?
Yeah, I think the last 2-3 months, or you can always argue the year, has been extremely interesting because from a fundamentals perspective, it's hard to see any other period in the history of Bitcoin with so many positive developments. From a new administration embracing Bitcoin and the overall asset class, from like Sailor saying, I think now 8 out of the 10 largest US banks are offering some kind of Bitcoin solution, Bitcoin credit. So that's totally novel. From Harvard disclosing Bitcoin as one of the largest one of the largest exposures in their endowment portfolio. We're now seeing largest bank in Russia starting to offer Bitcoin to their users. Vanguard saying yes, I think we're gonna allow it. Charlie Shop. So there's so many. We actually posted on our Twitter and Instagram account today a little bit about what has happened to 2025, and it's mind blowing, right?
Yeah.
So many positive developments in a somewhat short period of time. On the other hand, I think the price action was overall disappointing right? If you would ask any Bitcoiner or anyone tracking the market on, I don't know, December 4th, 2024, say, hey, what do you think would happen with the price if all of these events were to materialize? And everyone say, my God, Bitcoin will be probably at $200,000. Not only talk about what happened with Bitcoin, but say, hey, gold will be at all-time high and increase its market cap in $10 trillion, right? S&P essentially at all-time high. I think everyone would say, yeah, Bitcoin is easily above 150, likely $200,000, if not more. And that's not what happened.
Yeah.
Right? So can we call it a bull market? Is this a bear market? Is this a bull market in increments? Hard to say. But I think the sentiment reflects that gap between expectations and reality. We cannot say it was a bad year from a fundamental perspective. And even from a price perspective, we did not go as high as we expected. But again, Bitcoin is around $92,000, $93,000. You tell me when I joined this market that Bitcoin will get to this price level and say, okay, that's a dream. And the meme says about it all. I'm looking forward to when Bitcoin will crash to 100K or $92,000. And that's what happened. So I think the sentiment does not reflect the fundamentals. Overall, to the history of this new form of money has always been an amazing entry point, right? If you're a long-term investor and you're looking at fundamentals and you're not looking for a trade, this is an amazing opportunity, right? Not only at the Bitcoin level, but most of the other companies in the space, right? Like you see what Saylor has done with strategy, and now what he's trading at an mNAV of 115, 120, something like that. You see what Metaplanet was able to do, and they're below mNAV, right? So I think we clearly saw as well, especially on the Treasury side of the house, a boom of new companies coming to the market, right? I think Saylor defined a model in late 2024. Metaplanet showed that it's possible to replicate essentially throughout 2024, again in 2025. And then for anyone paying attention, say, hey, this does not work only in the US or Japan, it's likely working across the globe. And there's no reason for the US market to have a single one. Should have more than one Bitcoin treasury company. And then, hey, shouldn't have more than one or two, three Bitcoin treasury companies. We should have a Trump coin, a Dogecoin. So for sure, a lot of questionable projects came to the market. I think like that's clear. I think 2026 will be a year for these companies to prove themselves, right? Some people make mistakes, they will not be able to come back. Some people will show that they were built on solid foundation and will be able to thrive. So I'm over excited about what's coming next. The market action is challenging, but again, if you're a long-term investor, stacking Bitcoin at 80, 90 is a great opportunity. And that's how we think as a company. We're not here for one cycle. We're here for the next few decades. So challenging market overall, but again, that brings innovation. And we're going to see a lot of new things happening in this market over the next few months, I believe.
Yeah, that's really cool. I guess one thing as we start to draw to a close here that I thought might be good for someone like you, but since you started working in Bitcoin or started learning about Bitcoin, I guess what's the most surprising thing you've learned along the way?
I think it's how little I know. I think that's what is amazing about Bitcoin is a never-ending learning opportunity. I have been involved in this industry and following Bitcoin closely for almost a decade now, working full-time in this market for about 4 years. And every single day you learn something about the market, about the protocol, about the ecosystem. and it challenges every single aspect of your life. It changes your time preference. It changes how, like, think about it. Like, look how amazing it is. Like, OrangeBTC works on the Bitcoin standard. Like, we think in Bitcoin terms on every single investment. Most of our expenses are all Bitcoin driven for different reasons. So it just changes how a business operates top to bottom, right? And it changes how you go about your life top to bottom as well when you fully embrace this new form of money. And I think that's the most amazing thing in my perspective about Bitcoin, this market, because if you lean into it, you're learning every single day.
Yeah.
That ego test, I guess, basically, that we were getting at up front, where people have to be willing to learn new things. So that was a great.
Yep. All your mindset about life, you have to be open to question it all.
Yeah. And I mean, you now have the challenge of like making people question that haven't necessarily questioned, the 15%, treasury rate, or risk-free rate that they're getting from the government, which naturally is something hard to battle. 15% is
it looks very appealing on paper.
Yeah. So Gui, it sounds like you guys have a conference plan. What's the best way to follow you? What should we be looking out for? Sam Callahan's report, when is that dropping?
Yeah, so if you want to follow us and track our progress, best way is social media. So on Twitter, at Orange with J BTC, all together. Same handle for Twitter, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. The two reports written by Sam, you can find them on our social media accounts, but also in our website, Orange with J BTC.com. And then you can see our proof of reserves, you can see our dashboard, and also at our homepage, you can see the two reports written by Sam. There's a new one coming up in a few weeks, and you're going to be able to find it there as well.
Yeah, we'll share that out. Well, Gui, really appreciate you joining us. Great learning. It's certainly about a new market and the challenges of what it takes to bring Bitcoin to everyone. So really appreciate that.
That's a mission. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for covering this industry. Again, I think the main gap is understanding, and everyone is helping some way in some form. So thank you for your work, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah.
Excited to see what you build down there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone.